As a state actor, it will create proxy groups. And when it creates proxy groups or PGs, these proxy groups are basically what? These proxy groups are non-state actors. These non-state actors are going to be used by when we talk about the word terrorism, which I explained to you earlier in the first class in the basics, we will not repeat again, but we will just build on from where we left earlier. Firstly, there is no universal definition of terrorism as such. That is the first thing to remember. That there is no universal definition of terrorism. This basically means that no country has been able to achieve consensus on how to define it. Different countries have tried to define terrorism differently. India's way of definition, as we saw in the first class also earlier, was that we say that any violence which tries to achieve a political goal is called terrorism, because that is more relevant in our context. But when we talk about Western countries, for example, like US and all, these countries have often tried to define terrorism by basically giving a... So these countries, Western countries, have tried to define terrorism basically by giving a religious meaning. And they have tried to explain terrorism by attributing terrorism as a phenomena to certain specific religions. So for example, in the Western countries' definition and American definition, it has been often stated that terrorism primarily is attributed to certain specific religions like Islam. One thing we have to understand is that no religion officially advocates for terrorism, because all religions strive for peace. So no religion ever advocates for terrorism. Attributing terrorism to a specific religion itself is a wrong phenomena, because such a kind of an activity will not be globally acceptable. So when Western countries attribute it to a specific religion, the countries which follow specific religions thereby try to negate that logic that the Americans give. So in this context, what happens is basically this only, that we are unable to evolve a global consensus. It is also important to remember that India is also working with the United Nations to help United Nations come to a conclusion on a definition of terrorism. But what is important also to remember is that even UN has no official definition of terrorism. So just remember this basic idea, because this is important. That while countries may individually try to define terrorism, but it's not necessary that the definition of a country may be acceptable to others. Like in India, as I told you earlier, we also have our own working level definition. That working level definition that we have in India is that terrorism is basically a phenomena where a group resorts to violence to achieve a political goal. Now, it's not necessary that this definition will be acceptable to Pakistan. Pakistan will never say a group will be responsible for achieving a political goal, because we don't sponsor any such groups in Pakistan, nor does any other country do so. So what may be applicable in our context may not be applicable in some other's context. And in Western countries, the debate is altogether different. Rather than defining terrorism at the working level, they are focusing more on religious angles. Thus, a definition is completely elusive. So in this backdrop, you have to be very careful to remember this, that globally, there is no consensus on definition. At the UN level, there is no official definition of terrorism. India has its own working level definition of terrorism. This working level definition of terrorism is mostly used by the security forces while they prepare their counter-terrorism doctrines and counter-terrorism approaches. That is what you need to keep in mind. Now, there are various types of terrorism that are there. The most important type of terrorism that we will first study is the phenomena called the state-sponsored terrorism. State-sponsored terrorism. So in this topic also we will try to understand the role of external state and non-state actors as well. And then you will be able to also understand the infusion of the concept of terrorism along with it. So you see, when we talk about the word state-sponsored terrorism, let me first explain you this entire concept theoretically, because theoretical understanding is also very crucial. And then we will just transport the entire theory to practice through an example and you will understand everything clearly. Let's say there are two states A and B. There is a state A, there is a state B. State A attacks state B and thereby there is a war. If A attacks B, violates the sovereignty of B, there is a war. If A and B undertake a war, what will happen? B will try to resist A. Now let us assume that when A attacks B and when a war breaks out, let's say B defeats A. We are just taking a hypothetical theoretical example. A fights a war with B, B defeats A. After some time, A again initiates a war with B. B again defeats A. Then after some time, let's assume another time there is a war between A and B where A again initiates a war with B. And let's say B again defeats A. So this is just a hypothetical scenario that A initiated aggression, B retaliated to the aggression, decimated the state A. After getting decimated and defeated in war multiple times, the state A will understand one thing. The state A will understand one thing, that whenever I fight a direct war with B, I get defeated. This means that the state B has CMS. That is conventional military superiority. This is an important point to understand. State A fights many times a war with B. A gets defeated in the war by B. A develops an understanding that the state B is able to defeat me every time and again because it possesses conventional military superiority. Conventional military superiority means that the state B has military power which is higher than the military power of A. And this military power of B, which is higher than the military power of A, is used by the state B to defeat the state A. Now what happens? Now when A understands this, कि भाई B has CMS, A decides to avoid a direct war with B. A decides to avoid a direct war with B. But what is important to be remembered here? A may try to avoid a direct war with B, but does not give up the ambition to fight with B. This is an important point to understand. A may give up the ambition to fight a direct war with B, but does not give up the ambition to resist and fight with B. A has only given up the ambition to fight a direct war with B and wants to avoid a direct war with B because it knows that B has CMS. So what will A try to do is now that they will try to not give up the ambition to fight with B, but only give up the ambition to fight a direct war with B. But because the ambition to fight with B remains, this ambition then manifests as an indirect war. And in this ambition, which now manifests as an indirect war, A basically decides to go for an indirect war with B. What began as a direct war eventually takes the course of an indirect war only on the condition that the concerned party waging a direct war understands that waging a direct war is going to backfire, and such waging of a direct war is likely to backfire because indirect war will be more fruitful as the other party against whom I fight a direct war possesses conventional military superiority. So he decides to go for an indirect war with B. Now what happens in this indirect war with B? In this indirect war with B, A basically tries, in this indirect war with B, to basically create conditions for what is called proxy war against B. This indirect war manifests as a proxy war. In this proxy war, what will now happen? In this proxy war, A will create proxy groups against B. A is a state actor. As a state actor, it will create proxy groups. And when it creates proxy groups or PGs, these proxy groups are basically what? These proxy groups are non-state actors. These non-state actors are going to be used by a state actor called A against another state actor called B. And how these PGs are going to be used? These non-state actors or PGs will be used basically for the purpose of terrorism. So that means that in an indirect war, which is also called as a proxy war, a state actor will create proxy groups or PGs to basically resist another state, that is B. Now let me explain you more clearly. A will create PGs to resist B. So there is a direct support of A to the PGs. What will the PGs do? The PGs will, on behalf of state A, do two things. They will create OGWs and they will create FOs. OGWs are called overground workers and FOs are going to be called front organizations. Now understand one thing very carefully. A will support a PG. A PG on the other hand will, on behalf of the state A, will create OGW plus FO. Initially, the PG plus OGW plus FO will be in the territory of state A. Initially, all of this infrastructure will be in the A. But what will gradually happen is that these PGs, which are initially in the A, because they have to fight in B, what they will do is that in the state B, they will start nurturing OGWs. Here. They will start nurturing PGs here. They will start nurturing FOs here. So initially every infrastructure will be in your home state, from where the activity of terrorism originates, and then it will go to the other state. That is the idea here. You will understand it when we put this theory to practice in a more easier way. But just keep this theoretical aspect in mind. A creates PGs, PG creates OGWs and FOs. They will operate from A, then gradually go to B. Now what will happen? As we said, A will create PGs. PGs will be responsible for proxy war. This proxy war will be supported, strengthened through OGWs and FOs. So let me now explain you what are OGWs and FOs. FOs are front organizations. They are created by the PGs. What do the front organizations do? Please remember, in a proxy war, the objective of front organizations is to do radicalization. That is the important point to remember. They radicalize people. They radicalize people by changing their neural impulses, by giving them that information that will affect their thinking and thought process and brain. And consequently, because of that, they will be able to respond to things in a specific manner. Now, we will discuss that obviously in more detail, but keep this in mind. If FOs are doing radicalization, they do radicalization in 2 steps. Short-term radicalization, long-term radicalization. Short-term radicalization basically means that radicalization which is done instantly by a FO on behalf of a PG to prepare people to do terrorism immediately. So these are people who you will pick up are already affected people. But then what you will try to do is you will immediately try to radicalize them so that you can put to them to use of terrorism right away itself. Long-term radicalization is also done by FOs, where what they try to do is that in long-term radicalization, they basically create trusts, and through these trusts, they try to radicalize people over 15 to 20 years. This has been observed commonly.